The students gathered in the main lecture hall, a diverse group that would have been impossible just months ago. Younger races sat alongside representatives of elder species, all equal in their pursuit of understanding. On Earth, we have a saying, Marcus told the first class as he began his welcome speech. Justice grows like a seed. Someone must care enough to plant it, even when they might not live to stand in its shade. The translation systems carried his words into dozens of languages, but the meaning remained clear. Several students nodded, some making their own species gestures of agreement and understanding. Each of you comes from a world with its own concept of justice, Marcus continued. Some, like the Zarthans, see it as perfect balance. Others, like the Morrigans, view it as the protection of potential. The Eridani consider it the harmony of all paths. He touched the display case holding the cell plant. But like this simple plant, justice finds a way to grow even in darkness. It adapts. It reaches for light. And most importantly, it requires care and attention from those who believe in its importance. Across the galaxy, the story of the human who faced hatred with dignity was being shared in countless languages. It appeared in educational texts, diplomatic training programs, and even entertainment media. But its true impact was quieter, moving through personal conversations and individual choices. The peace treaty between Earth and the Zarthan Confederation had been revived, expanded to include other worlds that sought real cooperation rather than controlled development. The medical technologies were already saving lives in human colonies, while Earth's terraforming techniques were helping restore damaged ecosystems on multiple worlds. And in the background of it all, humanity quietly took its place among the stars, no longer feared, but finally respected. The change wasn't marked by grand ceremonies or official proclamations. Instead, it showed in small moments. A Zarthan family choosing to live in a primarily human sector, young aliens requesting to study at Earth universities, trading ships offering to carry cargo for human colonies without the usual restrictive terms. As the Academy's first session began, Marcus sat at the back of the hall, watching students from ancient and young species alike engage in passionate discussion about the nature of justice. Beside him, Krek made notes on future security reforms. Dr. Fella prepared for her afternoon lecture on cross-species ethics. Zorn meditated quietly, his silver robes reflecting the station's lights. Was it worth it? Krek asked suddenly, turning to Marcus. All the fear and pain you endured. Marcus watched a young Zarthan student earnestly explaining her people's philosophy to a fascinated human classmate. Look around, he said softly. This is just the beginning. The real story isn't about what happened to me. It's about what happens next. What all of us choose to do with the truth we've learned. Outside the station windows, stars stretched into infinity, no longer distant points of light, but beacons of possibility. Somewhere out there, another human ship was making first contact with a new species, and this time they would meet as equals, ready to learn from each other rather than fear their differences. The lesson of the plant in the darkness had been learned. Life finds a way to grow, justice finds a way to flourish, and understanding can bridge even the vastest of gaps between stars. As the evidence mounted, Marcus noticed something surprising. Respect in the eyes of aliens who hours ago had condemned him. Not for his innocence, but for how he'd faced injustice with dignity that transcended species barriers. A Morrigan representative approached during a brief recess, her feathered crest lowered in the gesture of apology. Your behavior throughout this ordeal, she said to Marcus, has been enlightening. Many of us believe the stories about human volatility and aggression. Yet when falsely accused, you sought truth, not revenge. Similar conversations were happening throughout the chamber. The conspiracy had been exposed, but something larger was taking place, a fundamental reconsideration of humanity's place in the galactic community. Zorn, who had been mostly silent, leaned toward Marcus. Do you understand what's happening? He asked quietly. Drex's fear is being replaced by something he never anticipated. What's that? Marcus asked. Hope, Zorn replied. For millennia, The elder species have managed galactic affairs through control and limitation. You've shown another way might be possible. The session resumed with testimony from other conspirators who had been identified and detained. Each confirmation of the plot's extent added to the growing sense that the Council stood at a turning point in its long history. As the day cycle lights of the station began to dim, the Exurethi judge called for a final statement from Drex before he would be returned to detention. The former High Counselor looked around the chamber at the species he had sought to control and manipulate. Then his gaze settled on Marcus. "I still believe I was right to be afraid," Drex said. "But perhaps we were wrong about how to respond to that fear. There may be other paths than the one we chose." As Drex was led away, Marcus remained in the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. In trying to destroy him, Drex had inadvertently elevated him, made him a symbol of something many species had forgotten was possible: change. 1 month later, Marcus stood at the newly created intersection of truths on Nexus Station, watching beings from dozens of worlds pass through the vast circular space. The area had once been a restricted diplomatic zone, but now it served as a public meeting place where species could gather freely. Beside him stood Krek, the former guard who had helped him, now appointed as the first Zarthan Justice Liaison. Krek's scales had brightened since taking his new role, showing the subtle blue-green patterns that indicated health and purpose among his people. "The council session is about to begin," Krek said, gesturing toward the reformed chamber. "They're voting on the final details of the reorganization. Everyone expects you to take a leadership position." Marcus smiled softly. "They offered me leadership of the reformed tribunal," he told Krek. "I refused." "Why?" asked the surprised Zarthan, his neck frills extending in confusion. "After everything that happened, you could reshape the entire justice system." "Because real change doesn't come from the top," Marcus replied, watching a group of young aliens from different species studying together at a nearby table. "It spreads from person to person, story to story." The aftermath of the conspiracy had transformed Nexus Station. The old hierarchies had been dismantled, replaced by new structures designed to prevent the abuse of power. But more importantly, the station itself had changed. Species that once kept strictly to their own sections now mingled freely. Younger races spoke up in council sessions without fear of rebuke. Instead of taking a high position, Marcus had established the first cross-species Justice Academy, where members of all council races would learn each other's concepts of fairness and truth. The academy occupied what had once been the private offices of the High Counselors. "The first full class begins today," Marcus said, watching more students arrive. 200 students from 43 worlds. In the academy's main hall, a simple earth object had become an unexpected symbol. A small potted plant Marcus had kept in his cell, somehow thriving despite the darkness. The plant now sat in a special display case, its green leaves reaching toward the station's artificial sunlight. Dr. Thala, who had joined the academy's teaching staff, studied the plant with fascination. It adapted to the cell's low light by developing larger leaves, she explained to visitors. Just as humanity adapts to each challenge. As Drex was guided to the witness position, a hush fell over the chamber. This was the architect of a plan that had nearly led to war between worlds, a being who had been willing to sacrifice millions of lives to maintain the status quo of galactic power. The Exurethi judge spoke first, his translucent body pulsing with colors that reflected his emotional state, currently a mix of anger and disappointment. "High Counselor Drex, you have been presented with the evidence against you. The council awaits your testimony." Drex's head frills flattened against his skull, a sign of submission that few had ever seen from him. "I acknowledge my actions," he said, his voice lacking its usual resonance. "But I maintain they were necessary for galactic stability." Murmurs of disbelief and anger rippled through the chamber. "Necessary?" The Exurethi judge's colors shifted to deep red. "You placed a device that would have killed everyone at the treaty signing. You framed an innocent diplomat." You conspired to engineer conflict between worlds. You don't understand the scales of time as we do, Drex replied, raising his head slightly. Young species see decades, mature species see millennia. Marcus had been listening silently, studying the fallen counselor. There was something in Drex's tone, not defiance exactly, but conviction. He truly believed in what he had done. Why? Marcus asked him directly, standing and stepping forward. The question broke all protocol. Prisoners were questioned by judges, not by those they had wronged. But no one moved to stop him. A tense silence filled the chamber as Drex turned his gaze to Marcus. The multiple eyes that ringed the Zarthan's head focused on the human with an intensity that would have been unnerving under any circumstances. The silence stretched until Drex finally answered. Because in 300 years, humans advanced from primitive technology to standing among stars. In 3,000 years, what would you become? Some futures cannot be allowed. The words sent shockwaves through the chamber, not hatred of humans, but fear of their potential. Representatives turned to each other, whispering urgently as the implications of Drex's statement sank in. You were afraid of us, Marcus said softly, realization dawning. Not what we are now, but what we might become. Not just me, Drex replied, seeming almost relieved to finally speak openly. There are those among all the elder species who recognize the pattern. Your adaptability, your drive, your empathy. Empathy, Marcus repeated, confused. You fear our compassion. We fear your ability to understand others, Drex said. Most species advance by focusing inward, perfecting their own nature. Humans advance by reaching outward, by connecting, by incorporating ideas from everything around you. It makes your development unpredictable. On the main display, new data appeared, recovered from hidden sections of Drex's files. Charts tracking human development against historical patterns of other species. Projections of human technological advancement over the next millennium. And most disturbing of all, detailed plans for interventions designed to slow human progress. Data retrieved from Drex's private files revealed a shadow coalition of elders from multiple species, announced a Pendoran analyst, their crystalline form gleaming under the chamber lights. They called themselves the Caretakers. Their stated goal was to ensure human civilization would destroy itself through engineered conflicts. Images appeared of subtle manipulations, trade disputes artificially inflamed, cultural misunderstandings exploited, resources made artificially scarce to encourage competition rather than cooperation among human colonies. How many other species have you managed this way? Asked a representative from one of the younger council races, their voice trembling with anger. Drex's silence was answer enough. The peace treaty, Marcus said, bringing focus back to the immediate issue. It would have given humans access to medical technology that would save millions of lives. How could preventing that create stability? It would have given you more than medicine, Drex replied. It would have given you understanding of molecular principles centuries ahead of your natural development curve. The next step would have been weapons based on the same principles. That wasn't our intention, Marcus argued. Intention is irrelevant to outcome, Drex said, sounding for a moment like his old authoritative self. Knowledge, once given, cannot be controlled. As the questions continued and more evidence was presented, Marcus found himself studying the faces and expressions of those around the chamber. Something unexpected was happening. The initial anger and shock were being replaced by something more complex, a reluctant reassessment. Zorn's face, with its delicate features and large pupil-less eyes, showed what might have been a smile. I taught your brother for 3 years at the Diplomatic Academy. Did you think I only taught him the official curriculum? Rain pattered against the windows of Lena's apartment in the rebuilt district of Singapore. Outside, the massive seawall that protected the city from rising oceans hummed with energy fields, a constant reminder of Earth's ongoing recovery from the climate wars. The trial is a sham, Zorn continued, activating the device. The 3-dimensional projection appeared above the table, showing Nexus Station's layout. Marcus has been set up by elements within multiple governments who fear the treaty. On Earth, Lena's hands flew across holographic displays, analyzing station security feeds that shouldn't have been accessible. Her background in systems security made her the perfect partner for Zorn's plan. Her fingers danced through layers of protection, finding backdoors and exploiting weaknesses that even the station's designers didn't know existed. "There," she said, pointing to a shadow moving through a maintenance tunnel. "That's not Marcus. The height is wrong, and the gait pattern doesn't match my brother's." Zorn leaned closer. "Can you clean up the image?" "Not enough to identify, but enough to prove it's not him," Lena said, her voice gaining strength. "Look at the timestamp. This was when Marcus was in a public meeting with the Morrigan delegation. He can't be in two places at once." Meanwhile, on Nexus Station, Dr. Thala, a young Zarthan scientist, risked her life making copies of evidence being destroyed by her own people. Her scaled fingers moved with practiced efficiency as she duplicated molecular scans of the sabotage device found in the environmental systems. Thala had met Marcus only once, at a conference on cross-species medicine. He had been the only human who bothered to learn the proper pronunciation of her name, with its complex clicking sounds. That small respect had made an impression on her, enough that she couldn't stand by while her government framed an innocent being. The lab was empty at this hour, but security drones made regular sweeps. She had precisely 4 minutes between each pass to copy the data and return everything to its exact position. Her heart pounded beneath her chest plates as she worked, aware that discovery would mean not just losing her position, but likely execution for treason. The molecular scanner hummed softly as it completed its work. Thala quickly removed the data crystal and replaced it with the official one, which she knew had been tampered with to implicate the human diplomat. For truth, she whispered to herself, using a phrase from her own people's ancient religion that few modern Zarthans still honored. In his cell, Marcus gained an unexpected ally, a guard named Krek, who had watched him closely during the previous night. Krek was younger than most Zarthan security officers, his facial scales still bright with the iridescence of youth. "Your meal," Krek said loudly as he deactivated a small section of the force field, just enough to pass through a tray of unappetizing protein cubes. Marcus nodded in thanks, noticing that Krek lingered longer than necessary. After a moment of apparent internal struggle, the guard spoke again, but much more quietly. "The other prisoners we hold, they usually beg for mercy or threaten revenge. Why do you not do the same?" Marcus considered the question carefully. He had noticed Krek watching him, had seen curiosity in those vertical pupilled eyes. This might be his only chance to make a connection. "Because justice doesn't come from fear or bargaining," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady and dignified. "It comes from truth." Krek's neck frills fluttered slightly, a sign of interest that Marcus recognized from his diplomatic training. "My father was a judge," Krek said after a long pause. "He taught me that justice must be based on evidence, not prejudice. He would not approve of this proceeding." Marcus stepped closer to the edge of his cell, careful not to appear threatening. "Then your father is wise. All I want is a fair examination of the evidence." Krek hesitated, then whispered, his voice so low Marcus had to strain to hear it. "The sabotage device. It contains technology no human has access to." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What kind of technology?" "Molecular bonding techniques that only 3 species have mastered," Krek replied, already backing away. "Zarthans, Eridani, and Morrigans." Before Marcus could ask more questions, Krek quickly moved away as another guard appeared at the end of the corridor. But those few words had changed everything. The pieces were starting to connect. Someone powerful wanted war between humans and Zarthans, and Marcus was their scapegoat. But why? What would they gain from destroying a peace that benefited both worlds? Back on Earth, Lena had made a breakthrough. "Zorn, look at this," she said, isolating a section of code from the station's security logs. Someone's been altering the facial recognition systems. They've created a specific exception that tags Marcus's face even when the biometric data doesn't fully match. Zorn studied the code. This is sophisticated work, far beyond what human extremists could manage. It would require high-level access to station systems. Lena agreed. Someone with authority. Or someone with allies in multiple governments, Zorn added grimly. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the communication device. A message from Dr. Thulla had arrived, heavily encrypted. Molecular analysis complete, Lena read aloud. The device contains Zarthan power cells, Morrigan trigger mechanisms, and Eridani control circuits. Zorn's usually impassive face showed shock. That's impossible. My people have no quarrel with humans or Zarthans. Unless, Lena began, a horrible suspicion forming. Unless those are from a faction within my government, Zorn finished her thought. A faction that opposes integration with younger species. On Nexus Station, Dr. Thulla slipped through service corridors, making her way toward the detention level. The data crystal felt heavy in her hidden pocket. If she could just get it to Marcus, he might be able to use it in his defense tomorrow. She rounded a corner and froze. 2 senior Zarthan security officers stood blocking her path. Dr. Thulla, said the ranking officer, his scales darkening with suspicion. You're far from the research labs. What brings you to the security sector? Thulla's mind raced. Everything they'd worked for could end here, in this dimly lit corridor. But somewhere in this station, a human stood tall despite impossible odds. She could do no less. Actually, she said, straightening her posture, I'm looking for you. There's something about the sabotage device you need to see. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus was pronounced guilty. Execution was scheduled for dawn. The council has reviewed all evidence and testimony, Judge Krell announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. We find the human, Marcus Chen, guilty of sabotage, attempted genocide, and crimes against galactic peace. The words hung in the air like physical things. Marcus stood straight, his face betraying no emotion even as his future vanished before him. In the audience gallery, several aliens nodded in satisfaction while a few others looked away, uncomfortable with the speed and finality of the proceedings. Sentence will be carried out at dawn station time, continued Judge Krell, his neck frills extending fully in a display of authority. The execution will be broadcast throughout council space as a reminder that no species, however young, is exempt from our laws. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to claim his right to final words. But Judge Krell raised a hand. This council sees no value in listening to more human deceptions. Court is adjourned. The guard stepped forward to take Marcus away. He looked around the chamber one last time, at the faces of so many species he had worked to build peace with. No allies here. No hope left. Then it happened. Suddenly, every screen in the tribunal chamber flashed with the Earth presidential seal, the blue and green emblem of a planet still rebuilding itself. The connection shouldn't have been possible. Earth was not permitted direct access to council communications. Their transmissions were always filtered, delayed, and monitored. What is this? Demanded the Morrigan judge, her feathers rising in alarm. Who authorized Earth access? The screens flickered, and a face appeared, strong, determined, with eyes that seemed to look directly at each viewer. I am President Sophia Okafor of Earth, announced a strong voice as a dark-skinned woman in simple clothes appeared. She wore no ceremonial robes, no elaborate symbols of office, just a plain blue jacket with a small Earth pin. I address not just the council, but all beings across our shared galaxy. The judges shouted for technicians to cut the transmission, but it continued, broadcasting to billions across thousands of worlds. Marcus watched in amazement as technicians rushed around the chamber, frantically working at control panels. We cannot stop it, one called out. The signal is bypassing all standard protocols. Today I break protocol because justice itself has been broken. President Okafor continued, her voice calm but firm. I speak directly to you, because those who claim to represent galactic law have failed to uphold its most basic principles. Marcus saw Judge Krell's scales darken with rage. This is an outrage, an attack on Council sovereignty. For 3 years, diplomat Marcus Chen has worked tirelessly for peace between our worlds. The president continued, a peace that would benefit both humans and Zarthans, the peace that would save millions of lives. On screens throughout the chamber, images began to appear alongside the president's face. Children in Earth's colony worlds, suffering from the plague that Zarthan medical technology could cure. Then images of Zarthan agricultural regions, struggling after years of mineral depletion that Earth's terraforming techniques could reverse. Someone did not want this peace. Someone was willing to murder innocents to prevent it. But it was not Marcus Chen. The judges were now in an uproar, some calling for guards, others demanding emergency protocols be enacted. But no one in the chamber could look away from the screens. I present evidence that proves not only Marcus Chen's innocence, but reveals who truly committed these crimes. The data began streaming across all channels, ship movements, secret meetings, and finally, security footage showing High Counselor Drex planting the sabotage device himself. The timestamp was clear, the footage sharp and unaltered. There could be no doubt. The chamber erupted in shock. High Counselor Drex was not just any official. He was the head of the entire Zarthan delegation to the Council, Krell's superior, and one of the most powerful figures in galactic politics. This cannot be real. Judge Krell sputtered, his composure completely broken. This is human trickery. The evidence has been verified by experts from 7 neutral species, President Okafor continued. And it was brave individuals from your own worlds who helped uncover this conspiracy, those who believed in justice more than power. The screen split to show Dr. Thala, the young Zarthan scientist who had risked everything to copy the evidence. She stood proudly beside Zorn, the Eridani teacher, and beside them stood Lina Chen, Marcus's sister, whose technical skills had broken through layers of security to find the truth. It is not humans who attempted genocide today, the president said. It is those who would sacrifice millions to maintain the status quo, a status quo that keeps younger species dependent and controlled. Marcus watched as the faces in the audience gallery changed from shock to confusion to growing anger, not at Earth, but at their own leaders. We found additional evidence, President Okafor continued. A manifesto written by High Counselor Drex himself, outlining a plan called Controlled Evolution, a plan to ensure that younger species like humans never gain true equality in galactic affairs. The manifesto appeared on screen, key phrases highlighted. Humanity advances too quickly for stability. Must engineer conflicts to slow their development. The peace treaty would give them too much independence. In the stunned silence that followed, Marcus looked at Judge Krell and saw something he never expected. Fear. Where is High Counselor Drex now? Someone shouted from the gallery. A commotion at the chamber's entrance drew all eyes. Security officers, not just Zarthans, but a mixed species team, entered, surrounding a figure in restraints. High Counselor Drex was brought forward, his usual proud bearing replaced by rigid tension. His eyes darted around the chamber, looking for allies and finding none. This broadcast is reaching every world in Council space, President Okafor said, her voice now solemn. Not because Earth seeks to embarrass or divide, but because all beings deserve to know when justice has been corrupted. All beings deserve the truth. Marcus felt the guards beside him loosen their grip, uncertainty replacing their former conviction. Earth does not ask for revenge, the president continued. We ask for justice, true justice, not the performance we witnessed today. We ask that those responsible face fair trials with real evidence and proper defense. We ask that the peace treaty be reconsidered on its merits, not buried because some fear change. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes seeming to meet those of every being watching across the galaxy. And we ask for the immediate release of Marcus Chen, a diplomat who has honored the highest principles of all our civilizations, principles I believe most of you share, regardless of your biology or your world of origin. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Then, from somewhere in the gallery, a sound began, the rhythmic tapping of hands, tentacles, and other appendages against surfaces. The universal sign of approval across species barriers. It grew louder, spreading through the chamber until it became impossible to ignore. Marcus looked at the judge's bench and saw the Chirathi judge rise slowly to his feet. "I move," said the judge, his translucent skin pulsing with light, "that we immediately review this evidence in full council session and that Diplomat Chen be released from custody pending investigation." The tapping grew louder still. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus allowed himself to feel something dangerous. Hope. Chaos erupted throughout Nexus Station. Species that had never spoken in council began demanding answers. 3 judges immediately recused themselves, fearing implication in the conspiracy that had nearly led to an innocent man's execution. The main council chamber, once a place of careful order and protocol, had transformed into a scene of near riot. Delegates shouted over each other in a dozen languages, while security forces looked on uncertainly, no longer sure who they should be protecting or from whom. High Counselor Drex remained in restraints, surrounded by a mixed-species security team. His once proud posture had collapsed, his scales dulled to a sickly gray as the weight of his exposed crimes pressed down on him. Judge Krell pounded his gavel repeatedly, the sound lost in the storm of voices. "Order. I demand order. This council session is suspended until—" "No," came a firm voice from the Chirathi judge. "You do not have authority to suspend these proceedings. Not now." The gallery had swelled beyond capacity as station residents and visitors pushed in, drawn by news of the extraordinary broadcast. Species that normally avoided each other now stood shoulder to tentacle, united by shock and indignation. A Morrigan diplomat pushed through the crowd to reach the speaker's platform. "My government demands to know how deep this conspiracy extends. How many of our representatives were involved in this controlled evolution plan?" From another section, a delegation of Pendorans, their crystalline bodies glittering under the chamber lights, added their voices. "The Pendoran Assembly has been denied full council membership for 3 centuries based on claims we were developmentally unprepared." Was this part of the same policy? Marcus remained on the defendant's platform, no longer restrained, but not yet officially released. He watched as the carefully maintained facade of Galactic Council unity cracked open, revealing the tensions and inequalities that had always existed beneath the surface. A group of junior delegates began pushing toward High Counselor Drex, their postures threatening. Security officers moved to intercept them, and for a moment, violence seemed inevitable. "Enough!" Marcus shouted. Somehow, despite lacking any amplification, his voice cut through the chaos. Perhaps it was the unexpectedness of the human speaking, or something in his tone that commanded attention. Whatever the reason, the chamber began to quiet. "The human stands accused of destroying our future," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear. "But look around you. In this moment of truth, humans didn't call for revenge. We called for justice." The chamber grew quieter still, hundreds of beings from dozens of worlds turning to face the human who stood alone yet unafraid. "I've studied all your cultures," Marcus continued, looking around the vast room and meeting the eyes, eye stalks, and sensory organs of many species. "Every species in this room has a word for fairness. Different words, same meaning. That's not coincidence. It's proof we're meant to understand each other." He stepped down from the defendant's platform and walked to the center of the chamber, to the place reserved for those addressing the full council. The Zarthans call it Krelte, the balance of truths. The Morrigans name it Feanor, the right of all beings. The Eridani have zoned the path that harms none. With each word from another language, representatives of those species straightened, surprised, and moved that this human had taken the time to learn not just their diplomatic protocols, but the deeper values of their cultures. For humans, we call it justice. And today, justice was nearly lost because some believed power was more important than truth. Even his prosecutors looked away, ashamed. Several had already begun quietly gathering their materials, preparing to distance themselves from a case they now realized had been built on lies. "I do not ask for punishment of those involved," Marcus said, looking directly at High Counselor Drex. "I ask that we remember why this council was formed in the first place, not to control the development of younger species, but to prevent the conflicts that nearly destroyed the founding worlds millennia ago." In the gallery, something unprecedented began to happen. A Zarthan representative stood up. Dr. Thola, the scientist who had risked everything to expose the truth. Then a Morrigan rose beside her. Then an Eridani. One by one, representatives from 7 different species stood in silence. A gesture never before seen in council history. The peace treaty between Earth and the Zarthan Confederation would have saved millions of lives on both our worlds. Marcus continued. It would have been the first step toward a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual benefit rather than control and dependency. That is what frightened those behind this plot. Not that it would fail, but that it would succeed. Outside the station, in the vast darkness of space, ships from Earth's small fleet arrived. They were not impressive vessels compared to the massive dreadnoughts of older species. Earth had only recently developed reliable interstellar travel, and their ships were practical rather than imposing. But they arrived not with weapons ready but with emergency beacons active, pulsing blue lights that sent a specific signal recognized across the galaxy. It was the galactic signal for a justice intervention, a rarely invoked right allowed by ancient laws the Council had hoped everyone had forgotten. The law permitted any species to challenge a judicial proceeding if evidence of corruption could be presented. It had been written into the original Council Charter as a safeguard, then buried under centuries of amendments and exceptions. On the Council's main display, the approaching Earth ships appeared, their beacons creating waves of blue light that spread across the screen. Ambassador Krell, said a Penderan representative, their crystalline form vibrating with a tone of satisfaction. "It appears the humans have studied our oldest laws more carefully than you expected." Krell's scales darkened further. "This is a minor technicality from an outdated. It is the foundation upon which this council was built," interrupted the Kexarethi judge, rising to his full impressive height. "And it states clearly that when a justice intervention is properly signaled, all current proceedings must be reviewed by a panel of neutral representatives." The images on the main screen shifted to show something else. Ships from other worlds moving to join the Earth vessels. First 1, then 3, then dozens, their own beacons activating in solidarity. "It appears," said the Kexarethi judge, "that Earth is not alone in its concerns." Marcus watched as the reality of what was happening sank in for Krell and the other judges who had been so quick to condemn him. This was no longer about one human diplomat or even one conspiracy. The system itself was being called to account. From the gallery, Dr. Thala stepped forward, her voice clear despite her obvious fear. "I submit myself as witness to the tampering of evidence in this case, and I am prepared to testify about other instances of manipulation I have observed." Others began to step forward. Aides, technicians, even security officers, each with their own piece of the larger pattern of corruption that had infected the council. Marcus looked at them all with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. How many had stayed silent for years, afraid to challenge the powerful? How many injustices had been committed before this one? "This is just the beginning," he said quietly to himself, as the council chamber transformed around him from a place of judgment to a place of reckoning. High Counselor Drex was brought to the chamber in restraints, his multiple eyes darting nervously. The once powerful Zarthan politician looked diminished somehow, his scales lacking their usual luster, his elaborate ceremonial robes replaced by simple gray detention garments. The emergency council session had been in progress for 6 hours. Representatives from 27 worlds had spoken, each demanding answers about the conspiracy that had been uncovered. The Exerethi judge now presided over the proceedings, the only one of the original 7 judges deemed neutral enough to continue. Screens around the chamber displayed fragments of evidence recovered from Drex's private systems, meeting records, communication logs, and planning documents dating back years. With each new revelation, the extent of the conspiracy became clearer, and the shock among the gathered representatives grew deeper. Marcus sat at a small table near the center of the chamber. No longer a defendant, he had been asked to participate in questioning those involved. Beside him sat Zorn, his former teacher, and Dr. Thala, whose courage had helped expose the truth. "Our sensors show nothing," the voice replied coldly. "Your theft of Earth property during a planetary evacuation is classified as a Class 1 offense. Stand down, or we will be forced to." The transmission cut off abruptly as the sky above Earth seemed to tear open. Massive shapes darker than the blackness of space appeared, their forms difficult for the human eye to process, like holes in reality itself. There were 5 of them, each larger than the colony ships, surrounding Earth in a perfect formation. "Do you see them now?" Alex whispered. Panicked transmissions erupted across all channels as the colony ships detected the void vessels. Colony Ship Alpha accelerated, attempting to break orbit, while the remaining 4 colony ships powered up their engines in desperate preparation to flee. "This is Earth Command declaring a full emergency. All colony vessels proceed to emergency launch protocols. Military platforms engage unknown hostiles. Earth's remaining orbital defense platforms, designed for intercepting asteroids, not fighting alien invasions, fired their weapons at the void ships. The energy beams simply disappeared into the dark hulls without effect. One by one, the defense platforms went dark as the void ships drained their power. Alex knew conventional weapons would be useless. He closed his eyes, focusing on the Guardian key in his palm. It hummed with renewed energy, having absorbed and integrated with Lysa's programming. He placed his hand on the control panel. "Connect me to all colony ships and Earth Command," he ordered the ship. "Priority override all channels." The Guardian technology responded, boosting his transmission beyond anything human technology could achieve. His voice and image would appear on every screen on every ship. "This is Dr. Alexander Chen. I've made contact with an ancient alien species called the Guardians who warned about these attackers. They're called the Void. They consume consciousness itself. Your weapons are useless against them, but I have technology that can help." Alex watched as Colony Ship Alpha was caught in a beam of darkness from one of the Void vessels. The colony ship's engines flickered and died as the Void began draining its energy, and more terrifyingly, the consciousness of everyone aboard. "The Void feeds on logical thought patterns," Alex continued urgently. "But they cannot process human emotion. The Guardians left technology that can create shields based on emotional energy. I'm transmitting the schematics now." Using the Guardian key, Alex sent detailed instructions to each colony ship. The plans showed how to modify their engines to create protective fields powered by human emotion. "You need people with irregular heart patterns to control these shields," Alex explained. "People like me. People you rejected from the colony program because of heart arrhythmias." On his view screen, Alex could see the confusion and disbelief on the faces of Earth's leaders. But as the second colony ship was caught in a void beam, desperation overcame skepticism. "What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Chen?" asked a woman Alex recognized as the director of the colony program, the same person who had rejected his application years ago. "Find everyone with heart conditions similar to mine. Get them to your engine rooms. Have them place their hands on the control panels while focusing on strong emotional memories. Love, hope, courage, compassion. The frequencies created will disrupt the Void's attack." To Alex's surprise, the director nodded. "We have medical records of all applicants. There are at least a dozen people with conditions similar to yours on each ship. Get them to the engine rooms now," Alex urged, "and prepare to link all 5 colony ships together. The emotional energy can be channeled between vessels to create a larger shield. As the colony ships scrambled to implement his instructions, Alex studied the void vessels. Their formation had a clear pattern. 4 smaller ships surrounding one massive central ship. The Guardian memories had shown him that the void operated as a hive mind, with all directives coming from a central consciousness. "I need to target the mothership," he murmured to himself. On his screens, Alex watched as the first glimmers of blue energy began to form around Colony Ship Alpha. People with irregular heartbeats were connecting to the modified engines, creating shields of emotional energy that the void couldn't penetrate. The dark beam attacking the ship wavered and broke. "It's working," came the excited transmission. "The shield is holding." One by one, the other colony ships established their shields. Blue energy arced between them, forming a network of protection. But Alex could see it wasn't enough. The shields were defensive only. They couldn't drive the void away or prevent them from simply waiting until the humans' emotional energy was exhausted.